After doing a series dissecting the Dead Three, Bane, Paul, and Merkel, who have always been closely related to the events of every single Baldur's Gate game, and after having gotten deeper and deeper researching and exploring some of the secrets and lesser-known aspects of Baldur's Gate 3 in the process, I have come to realize that there is actually so much lore that the game drops on the player. So many items just stepped in the history of the Forgotten Realms, so much context for so much of what transpires in the story that the game simply does not elaborate upon. There is so much that the game does not tell you that when you do learn, you can't help but go, oh, holy shit. It's actually funny for me as a content creator because for those of you who don't know, I have been doing YouTube full-time for 14 years, and throughout the majority of that time, I was exclusively doing lore videos and deep dives on my beloved Elder Scrolls Skyrim. Now that game had true depth, unbelievable secrets, real love and care put into every single character and storyline, but above all, it had lore. And that's the benefit of having several prequel games under your belt. There was so much to that franchise that I was able to spend literal years just breaking down the game and the story apart, and it was awesome. Now, the funny thing about Baldur's Gate 3 is that it's actually the same when you think about it. The depth, the secrets, the deep lore that precedes it all. It's a shock to me, frankly, that I haven't done more videos on all of the interesting things found in Baldur's Gate 3. One such thing, though, really did caught my eye the other day. The one plot point that drives the entire story forward. An item so powerful that it was taken and safeguarded by an archdevil in the Nine Hells. An item that was so feared by one of the most powerful gods in the world. An item that after being found and used by those who knew how to use it, it was close to conquering or destroying everything that we held dear. And the interesting part was that this would have not been the first time that this one item almost helped cause the absolute obliteration of the entire world. Now, I am talking, of course, of the Crown of Karsus. The crown that the Cult of the Absolute placed upon the Elder Brain in order to gain control over it. In Baldur's Gate 3, we don't really get to explore too deeply into the actual powers of the crown, as the main focus obviously is merely on the Netherstone's ability to control the one that wields the crown. But it is the crown itself and the abilities it has that is the most fascinating. So what are those abilities? And who is Karsus, who seemingly created the crown? How does he relate to the Netherese Empire, as the name of this kingdom does appear in the game over and over again? And for that matter, is he at all related to the dark and twisting weave that Gale absorbed into his body? What exactly is actually that which he absorbed into his body? We have a lot of ground to cover, but before we do that, this video is brought to you by Battlemarked, a video game collaboration between Demio and Wizards of the Coast. Look, I genuinely believe that we're entering a golden age of Dungeons & Dragons video games after we have been starved for, oh god, so long, and I just could not be happier. Okay, so Demia was a turn-based tactical RPG video game that simulated the feeling of playing with dice and tokens on a battle map, where you could just drag and drop the figurines, you could collect gold, spells, items, and abilities through cards, and you could run through storylines, either solo or co-op with your friends, doing, quests and slaying monsters. And well, their partnership with Wizards of the Coast now got us Battlemarked, which just released over on Steam, a reimagining of the game for Dungeons & Dragons with a collection of several storylines that you can play through, of course, all of them set in the Forgotten Realms universe. Here's my character, Bolthrax Brightscale, a Dragonborn Paladin that is a little bit on the dumb side, but hey, more than makes up for it by the fact that he can smite every turn. The game is fully voice acted, and I was actually very impressed with the performances. Here, you can check it out.
Two fuzzy humps lie in the clearing and give you pause. The nearest bear stirs in its sleep.
The quality is really good. Dragging and dropping the miniatures and the dice does feel fantastic. You can play fully co-op with up to 4 people, and the fact that, again, it is set in the Forgotten Realms already makes me hyper engaged in the story because, and look, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but you do get to go to some very important places in the lore, and it always feels great when you can just experience that in a video game. There's just nothing like it. Now, keep in mind that you're not playing D&D, you're playing the Demio system, but they have done a great job at bringing D&D classes over and doing faithful renditions of them in here. As you can play the Paladin, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, Sorcerer, and the Bard. And of course you can equip them different weapons which grant you different abilities. They each have dozens of their unique skills brought over from 5e. You can level them up, you can decide some of their stats which define how you get to build them, and overall you just get a very deep and intricate turn-based RPG system that will keep you hooked for a while. Now please go ahead and check it. I have been having a blast, I'm sure that you will too. If you want to buy it, if you can, please use my link in the description so that they know that I sent you. And thank you all so much for your support, and of course thank you Battlemarked for sponsoring the video. But now, back to the lore. In the city of Baldur's Gate, there is a large magic store called Sorcerer's Sundries. Hidden deep within those vaults, away from the prying eyes of its customers and protected by powerful magic, lies a legendary book, the Annals of Karsus. And when you read it, it says, quote, "An ancient handwritten book, rebound at least twice, that purports to be notes written by the mage Karsus himself. Much of it is in a personal wizard's cipher, but the final page is written in clear text. My great spell of transcendence is mine alone, not to be committed to ink and parchment, but I have also forged 3 supreme enchanted items that are the physical embodiments of my wizardry, and of them I shall make record. There is a crown, an orb, and a scepter, each nigh alive and with its own power and purpose, and these I call the regalia of Karsus, the crown of Karsus, to attract and absorb magical knowledge, and give the wearer dominion over himself so that he remains his own entity apart from the weave. The orb of Karsus, a storage device or battery that condenses mystic power, ever gathering so that it must be siphoned at intervals of its excess. The scepter of Karsus, an instrument of projection, a focusing utensil for the precise wielding of unimaginably vast forces. Know of these items you must, for if I fail to achieve immortality, they will persist, and I dare say, live on beyond me." End quote. So Karsus is the creator of not just the crown of Karsus, but also 2 other items that, at least according to this book, are presumably as powerful as the crown itself. And one has to presume, based on the title he has given them, the Regalia of Karsus, that they are part of a set, likely with complementary abilities or an overarching theme, a purpose perhaps. Now let's begin by answering the question of who is Karsus. Now Karsus was the most powerful wizard of Netheril, an ancient human magitocratic empire that was founded about 5,500 years ago. It is arguable whether or not they were truly the most powerful empire in the history of the Forgotten Realms, but it is certainly inarguable that magic was at its most advanced during their height. Most of the staple spells and magic items that exist nowadays were actually created by them. And all of our understanding of magic, how it functions and how to tap into it, does come largely from the studies and discoveries made by the Netherese Empire. So advanced they were at the time that their greatest wizards created and were able to cast spells of 10th and 11th level, compared to nowadays where a wizard able to cast 9th tier magic is considered basically a prodigy and is a rarity almost never seen. In particular, their greatest discovery was the art of creating artifacts that could automatically absorb the magic from the air, which then wizards nearby could use as a font of mana, so that instead of spending their own resources, they would simply tap into the artifact to use their magic. These great artifacts they called the Mythalars, and through them, magic items, enchantments, or even ongoing spells were made to be effectively permanent if they wanted to, because they could be sustained or recharged by the Mythalar automatically. It was thanks to those mythalars that wizards could experiment endlessly without tapping their resources, that they could enjoy access to so many magical items, that poor people that didn't even know how to use magic could then use magical items because they didn't have to use their own reserves, which of course they didn't have. And it was also the reason how they could produce the amount of magic that they required in order to levitate their own cities high up in the sky. In fact, that is actually one of the biggest things that Netheril was known for, having several of their cities literally just floating up in the sky. Now, it all came to an end, however, almost 2,000 years ago when Karsus committed the unthinkable.
Once upon a very long time ago, a mighty lord lived in a tower. A flying tower, to be precise. I'll save his history for another time, but the gist of it is that he sought to usurp the goddess of magic so that he could become a god himself. And he almost managed, but not quite. And his entire empire, Netheril, came crashing down around him as he turned to stone. The magic that was unleashed that day was phenomenal. Roiling like the prime chaos that outdates creation. Even the weave itself could not withstand the onslaught. It fractured, then shattered, and all magic was lost to the mortal realms, until the day Mystra returned.
The Netherese Empire was at war with the Faerûn, powerful aberrations whose natural abilities countered the wizards perfectly. They were naturally resistant to magic, they could absorb and drain magic, they were powerful spellcasters in their own right who used spells that required their unique physiology to be cast, meaning that the Netherese could not copy or learn their spells. And worst of all, a side effect of the way how Faerûns casted their magic, it caused all of the moisture of the area to be drained away, meaning that battles against the Faerûn completely destroyed the environment all around them, which inevitably led to much of Netheril becoming deserts unfit for life. Now, the Netherese, unable to defeat the Faerûn for hundreds of years and with a hope to cement his legacy forevermore as the greatest wizard of all time, Karsus designed an incredible spell meant to destroy the Faerûn in one fell swoop, in the only way that he figured he could. Karsus created the first and only 12th level spell, a spell called Karsus's Avatar. Now, the spell required 6 hours to be cast and allowed him to target one god of his choosing with unlimited range. Quote, Karsus spent well over a decade researching this spell. It was so complex that he had to use a stone-filled gizzard of a gold dragon and part of the epidermis of the pituitary gland of the Tarrasque just to enchant one of the material components needed for the spell. This spell allowed the caster to become a god of his choosing, replacing a current god with himself the moment the spell was completed. Whether the gods received a saving throw, were aware of its casting, and other factors were unknown. The notes regarding the spell's essence were nowhere to be found. It's believed Mystra, the reincarnated form of Mistral, snatched the spell's information from the ruins of Karsus' enclave and sent it on an eternal journey to the ends of the universe. End quote. Karsus targeted Mistral, the goddess of magic at the time, and sought to replace her in order to manipulate the weave of magic, such as to destroy the Faerûn in one fell swoop. Unfortunately for him, he did not realize that the weave of magic is literally Mistral, and that without her directly and constantly manipulating it, the weave would simply unravel and cause calamity. When Karsus became the god of magic, replacing Mistral, he was unable to control the weave, and as he had taken her ability to do so as part of the spell, Mistral could not either, and so the weave of magic untangled and magic ceased to function for the entire world. Without magic, the Mythalars could not sustain the flying cities of Netheril anymore, and so all of the floating enclaves came crashing down, killing everyone and destroying the entire Netherese Empire in mere moments. The unraveling of the weave, the fact that Mistral shortly sacrificed herself to try and mend the weave, and the fact that his spell was still functioning but no longer had a target, as Mistral was dead, caused him to become petrified. And so the spell, trying to bring in so much energy but having nothing to do with it, inevitably would turn Karsus into stone. And it was in that moment, with Karsus being petrified, however still containing the perfect perception that a god has, even though he could not move or act, he could actually see the fruits of his labor in his final moments, just as the cities collapsed to the ground in front of him. And Mystra was eventually able to reincarnate as Mystra and repair some of the permanent damage done to the weave, and when she did, she forever barred the usage of spells higher than 9th level, which is why we're not able to cast those spells anymore nowadays. And so that is Karsus, and that's a general overview for the backstory of the Netherese Empire. And this event, this entire destruction of the Empire, is known as Karsus's Folly. Now, the Mystra that we have nowadays as the goddess of magic that you see in the game is not actually the same Mystra that was reincarnated from Mistral back then. The Mystra from back then was eventually killed during the Time of Troubles, an event where all of the gods were thrown into the mortal realm, and then after her death, a wizard named Midnight was able to ascend in order to become the new goddess of magic, taking on the same name as her predecessor Mystra. It is also funny that this new Mystra has also died once, but was later resurrected. In fact, she was resurrected literally like 13 years ago to the present day, and was not able to become a full divinity again until like 5 years ago to the time where the game takes place. But regardless, you can see why Mystra in particular would be so involved in specifically attempting to destroy the crown of Karsus, as, you know, the wizard that created it literally killed the original goddess of magic and almost destroyed the world. This is why she is willing to even send Elminster, one of the most famous and most powerful wizards of the modern age, to just send a message to Gale, also canonically by the way an extremely powerful wizard, and her ex-consort by the way, to literally blow himself up just to destroy this artifact. But the question here is, why can't Mystra just do it herself? As the goddess of magic, why can't she just destroy the crown of Karsus, a magical item? Or maybe even the Elder Brain that wields it. Or better yet, why can't she disrupt the magic from the crown if she is a goddess of literal magic? Well, remember that entry from the Annals of Karsus. It said that the crown attracts and absorbs magical knowledge and gives the wearer dominion over himself so that he remains his own entity apart from the weave. This is the reason why Mystra can't destroy the crown. But to explain that, we need to first go over what exactly is the weave, so that I can explain to you why that is even possible. Okay, see, the world is suffused with raw magic. Everything is. The air, the ground, the plants, and even people. Everything has raw magic within them. And this raw magic doesn't truly exist in a tangible way, per se. It's not just there in a way that you can touch or perceive it, which is good because raw magic is destructive. It is volatile and harmful. It is a chaotic force that has to be harnessed with great care, or it unleashes horrible powers. Raw magic is also sealed deep and is very, very hard to access, which is why the weave exists. The weave is a creation of the original Mistral. It is a layer that exists between the raw magic of the world and the physical reality that everyone lives in. This weave is designed to allow spellcasters to utilize magic in a safer way. It's actually designed to make spellcasting easier, more intuitive, while also preventing vast amounts of raw magic to simply gush out into the real world whenever anyone taps into it. And this is the other thing. Without the weave, raw magic simply gushes out and dissipates from the world, disrupting all manner of existing magic, creating mayhem as it does, until no raw magic is left. This is actually what happens whenever you have a zone of dead magic. This would be a location where the weave is destroyed or removed, and now the raw magic has simply dissipated from that location. This is also what happens whenever the goddess of magic has been killed, as that, of course, destroys the weave, causing raw magic to dissipate from the world and leaving that world without magic up until the time that the weave can be recreated. Now, do note that this is different from the effects of a Dispel magic spell. Dispel magic, quote, smooths out the energies of the weave, returning it to its normal untapped state, end quote. So the spell magic effectively just puts the weave in its default state, but does not actually remove any of the magic in the area. A commonly misunderstood concept. I would also like to point out that areas where the weave does exist, but has been terribly damaged, that's where wild magic appears. But anyways, now Mystra, as the goddess of magic that controls the weave, she has absolute command over how it behaves, even who can gain access to it. In fact, Mystra can literally just target a person and make it so that that person cannot access the weave anymore. There's nothing that they can do about it, making them unable to cast spells for the rest of their life. Just like that. Her power to control the weave is so absolute that the lore even states that she can do this to gods. If the avatar of a powerful god were to walk the world, Mystra could just prevent that avatar from casting any spells if she wanted to. Oh, and it gets even crazier than that. Mystra can actually detect if a person would access the weave in any way, shape, or form literally 6 months before it happens. As in, she knows ahead of time, 6 months in advance, if anyone is going to do something crazy with the weave. This would affect both arcane magic and divine magic, by the way, as both arcane and divine magic use the weave to produce magic in the world. And the only difference between those two types of magic would be that arcane casters learn how to manipulate the weave themselves, whereas divine casters are implanted that knowledge directly into their minds by the gods. And again, just to be clear, we're talking specifically about the Forgotten Realms, so the world where Baldur's Gate 3 is set. But anyhow, there is of course a limit to how much Mystra can do. Every time that she wishes to annul the casting of a specific spell, or every time that she wishes to specifically target an individual for any reason, she has to divert her attention to do so. And there is a limit to how many things a god can do at the same time. In fact, we know exactly what this limit is, as we were told how to calculate this on the book Fates and Pantheons, a lore book on D&D gods in 3rd edition. The power of a god's ability to multitask is dependent on the divine rank of that god. With the more powerful they are, the more things that they could do at the same time. Mystra, in fact, has a divine rank of 18, and according to her Dayfix statistics, she can extend her senses to up to 20 different locations at the same time, in addition to her own immediate location. So she could be given a quest to a cleric in one location, while listening to a heartfelt prayer of another cleric in another, while fixing magical ley lines in another location, while also solving a magical catastrophe in another, and so on, to a maximum of 20 different locations. This is why when you, the player character, cast the spell Commune and then expect your god to answer you, you sometimes get a representative instead, as the god can only extend their senses so many times. So it's not like your god hates you, okay? There's just a lot going on. Now things of course get vastly more complicated once you realize that the other gods can indeed counter or muffle a god's ability to sense certain things, or when you take into consideration the politics of gods, where if you started to see Mystra mess with the clerics of another god, regardless of who that god was, the other gods would start to gain excuses for them to also meddle in other gods' affairs. Which of course is why there is a chilling effect on gods, particularly Mystra, to do certain actions. I should also point out that Bane, one of the Dead Three, and one who would do whatever he could to disrupt Mystra, has a divine rank of 17, so he's almost as powerful as Mystra. So it stands to reason that a lot of what Mystra would want to do, it is very likely that Bane would try to seek to counter. But I digress. This is all just so that you can get a bit more context as how Mystra might not be able to easily shut down the Absolute. Actually, when you start thinking about it, a lot of what the Chosen do in Baldur's Gate 3 is, actually unrelated to them casting spells. Isn't that interesting? Ketheric's power comes from a divine being simply existing who is not even on the material plane, and the great army that he has formed is really the source of his strength. Gortash is literally just a politician who specifically built constructs that do not require the use of spells as his main force. And Oren is an assassin who uses her natural shape-shifting ability, so she has no need for spells. In this regard, Mystra is kinda screwed. There's not much that she can do in there in order to disrupt their operations. She could deny the weave to several of their cultists, of course, but to make any meaningful difference, she would have to do that to hundreds, if not thousands of them, and that would only serve to weaken her and draw the ire of several opposing gods in the process. And for her to remove access of some to the weave, she would likely have to reinstate access to the weave to others, probably far more dangerous wizards in other parts of the world, because she can only ban so many creatures from the weave. So all in all, just doing that would be neither feasible nor smart. Okay, but then what about the Crown of Karsus? Okay, so the crown allows the user to function outside of the weave. But what exactly does that mean? Well, there are two main ways to use magic outside of the weave, technically three. Now, one, of course, is to simply circumvent the weave and access the raw magic behind it. The problem with raw magic, however, is that you can't really use spells for it. The concept of a spell is basically just a formulation, a recipe that you can learn in order to tap into the weave and then use magic. This is why using the weave makes casting easier. It's because you have spells, little formulas that makes it easier to do so. But there is no such thing that you can learn when dealing with raw magic. There is no specific choreographed production that you can get with raw magic. It is also extraordinarily difficult to manipulate it without dying. The one most famous example, and what might be one of the only few examples of the application of raw magic, is actually Spellfire. Spellfire is usually the staple ability of the Chosen of Mystra, and it manifests as a searing blue-white light that can heal or burn. And usually those that master the use of raw magic in this way are able to absorb other sources of magic targeted at them in order to fuel their own raw magic. But generally only the Chosen of Mystra are able to do this, and usually because Mystra allows it. Circumventing the weave is very, very difficult. Now, another way to circumvent the weave that is possible is to gain access to the Shadow Weave. The Shadow Weave is a creation of Shar, designed specifically as a way to counter the power of Mystra. There is a whole backstory about why she would want to do this. It relates to the fact that Selûne and Shar were the original gods of this world who fought, and as part of their fight, the blood that they shed formed into gods, which include Mystra, or rather Mistral, the original goddess of magic. And back then, Mistral's actions could be construed as taking on the side of Selûne in the overall conflict, because Shar wanted to kind of eliminate all life and Mistral didn't want that. And so basically Shar sought to undermine and destroy Mistral. It's complicated, but suffice to say, Shar was actually able to learn and model her own weave based off of Mistra's. But exactly how Mistra's weave coats existence in the material plane, Shar's weave does so in the Shadowfell. And well, Mystra has no power over any spell that is cast through the use of Shadow Weave in the Shadowfell. And those spells can access and manipulate raw magic with the help of the Shadow Weave in a safe and more traditional environment akin to normal spellcasting. It is, however, an entirely different set of rules, and a caster would have to attune and learn how to access the Shadow Weave to even be able to cast spells from it. It's not just like an automatic thing that any caster can do, and a caster that uses magic from the Shadow Weave would effectively lock themselves out from being able to access the normal weave. This is in fact yet another reason why Mystra is likely very much unable to do much to the Cult of the Absolute, as of course, as you all know, they are based in the Shadowlands, a region covered by Shar's influence, and any creature close to Shar, which we know that Ketheric once was, it would be able to produce magic and magic items through this different infrastructure of magic. But now, the third way to circumvent the weave is a bit difficult to explain. So, when Karsus attempted to subsume Mistral, destroying much of the weave in the process, and Mistral in turn sacrificed herself to try and repair it, something interesting happened. The new reincarnated Mystra was able to repair much of the weave and gain control of it, but not all of it. See, the original weave was not just a creation of Mistral, it was Mistral. The lore states that the weave was a form of avatar for Mistral, that the two were basically one. When Mistral died, the weave as it was also died. In other words, the weave that was recreated when reincarnated Mystra went on to repair it was an entirely different weave. Different and separated from the original. Mystra has access to and can control the new weave. But the old weave, oh, that's different. Mystra would have no way to control that ancient once unregulated weave, and the craziest part of it is that the new rules of magic enacted by that old Mystra would have no effect on the old weave. meaning that someone with access to the Old Weave could cast spells of 10th, 11th, or even 12th level if they knew how to. An example of this is actually Evermeet, the sacred island of the elves. During the Sundering, a cataclysmic event when the elves once attempted to bring a piece of heaven into the material plane way too long ago, the elves succeeded in doing so and created Evermeet. But they also, just like with Karsus, they did irreparable damage to the weave of the world. The damage was such that it is said that no one can cast Elven High Magic anywhere in the world anymore, except for in Evermeet, as the weave in Evermeet is how it once was, severed from the rest of the world, pure and undiluted like at the very beginning of this world's time. But as an example, the rules that Mystra has set for magic nowadays simply do not apply in Evermeet, and the same thing can be applied to any location or source of Old Weave that may exist or you may find in the world. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what I believe is what the Crown of Karsus is using. I say I believe because the Crown of Karsus is a creation of Larian Studios, of course. There is no actual mention of this artifact outside of this game, so I have no lore to literally and conclusively tell you what the Crown of Karsus is or what it does. I have to base everything on history and what the game gives me. But what we do have is a fair amount of lore that corroborates this fact. Let's use the Kars Stone as an example. So, the Kars Stone is the heart of Karsus, transformed into an orb of pure magic when he became petrified during the end of the casting of his great spell. The lore states that this orb is likely one of the few, if not the very last, source of whole magic in the world. Whole magic is just a term used by either descendants of the ancient Netherese or scholars that study Netheril to basically denote what is effectively a fragment of the Old Weave. The Kars Stone is searched for and hunted by followers of Mystra, as well as by those who seek to unearth the secrets of ancient Netheril, and of course, by those who wish to produce powerful incantations that Mystra cannot stop. And you know who currently holds the Kars Stone? None other than Shar herself. Shar controls one of the only facets of whole magic left in the world, a magic that Mystra cannot touch or regulate. But now that you mention it, isn't it interesting that there is mention of a powerful orb in the Annals of Karsus book in Baldur's Gate 3. It mentions the Orb of Karsus as a storage device or battery that condenses mystic power, ever gathering so that it must be siphoned at intervals of its excess. Actually, we also know that the way this book describes the orb perfectly resonates with the orb that Gale accidentally absorbed into his body, and that now destroys him from the inside. In fact, Gale does describe how this orb held a piece of ancient magic from Netheril, removed from the weave, that he wished to try and find a way to reunite with Mistra's new weave. Do note as well how this orb also has sunk into Gale, like a heart. Curious. It's also curious how Gale just happened to find this orb, and how it led to the severing of his relationship with Mystra. Even more curious how Gale described this orb, using terms such as writhing shadow or dark orb. It almost sounds as if Shar might have tampered with the Kars Stone, left it in a place Gale would find it, and did so with the expectation to destroy or corrupt one of Mistra's closest allies, or perhaps in hopes that Gale might have accidentally corrupted Mystra herself with the orb. It almost sounds like that, doesn't it? Fascinating. Anyhow, Karsus clearly had the ability to sever and contain pieces of the old weave, but more importantly, to sever it in such a way that it would not interact with the rest of the weave. By that I mean, it is clear that the destruction of the old weave did not affect this orb of whole magic, the Kars Stone. So Karsus was effectively able to separate pockets of weave from the rest. One can only presume that if the Orb of Karsus was his master creation in this line of experiments, that there were likely several trials that came before. Spells or magic attempts he created in his attempt to create this orb. It also would stand to reason that the regalia of Karsus would be 3 magical artifacts that would have some form of theme or some connection, to be considered all part of a set. And with that in mind, it is very likely that the crown of Karsus was created following this same pattern, using a piece of the weave that was separated from the rest. A piece of the weave that no longer exists nowadays, and so a piece of old weave that cannot be controlled or manipulated by Mystra, hence, and in conclusion, why Mystra cannot touch it or destroy the crown. Fun fact, this is also why one of the few ways that the crown could actually be destroyed is by having Gale detonate himself, as the explosion he would wreath would be created using the orb of whole magic inside of him, which of course uses the old weave. Therefore, it is one of the few magical things in the world left that could even harm the crown at this point, being itself a nigh-indestructible creation brought to bear also with magic from the old weave. This actually also explains why the tadpoles implanted onto the main characters and all of the Chosen were impossible to remove. One can only presume that the crown of Karsus and the Elder Brain using it were able to separate these tadpoles from the new weave, such that they could not be influenced or destroyed by it. But furthermore, and perhaps more importantly, to even grow stronger the more others would attempt to tamper with it. Remember, one of the powers of the Crown of Karsus, and as a matter of fact also the Orb of Karsus, is to attract and absorb magic. Seeing as these items are separated from the weave, they probably can't absorb much on their own because there's not a lot of old magic to absorb. Until, of course, someone else forces magic into them. Interesting stuff. Now, you may have forgotten, but do you remember what Auntie Ethel says when she tries to remove the parasite?
The parasite squirms at the hag's words. Pain builds behind your eye. You feel the creature writhe as it's dragged towards your ear. Then it bites back, burrowing even deeper into your brain.
Goddamn wretched! You little shit! You didn't tell me it was Netherese! I'm not touching that!
See, even the Night Hag understands that when something is tampered with the magic of Netheril, there is not much that you can do to destroy it. It exists in an entirely different dimension of magic that you cannot interact with the new magic. However, what about her comment regarding it being filthy shadow magic? Is the magic of Netheril shadow magic? Okay, well, see, it's a bit complicated. The true answer is no, not really. Netheri's magic is normal arcane magic. However, after the Empire collapsed, there was an enclave, one of the floating cities, that was able to survive by magically transporting itself, the whole city, into the Shadowfell. These Netheris went on to develop different magics, of course, based on the Shadowfell, and they are, or at least were, as of recently, the only presumed surviving Netheris enclave. So there is an association of Netheris and shadow magic, particularly so if you're talking about the present day Netheris, but do keep in mind that at least when it comes to Karsus and the entire Netheris empire when they originally stood, that association of Netheril and shadow would not be as strong. I mean, there were incredibly powerful usage of shadow magic back then, and that is a fact, but their magic would be by no means fully categorized as shadow magic. Not even close. So Ethel here is probably speaking regarding her own personal experiences with current present-day Netheris, which are shadow mages, or perhaps she misattributed the taint of shadow that the tadpoles have as a result of originating from the shadow-cursed lands. Or perhaps Shar did indeed have a more hands-on approach with this entire plot than we were led to believe, though that is a bit unlikely considering the animosity that the cult, or Ketheric himself at least, would have towards Shar. But now, how does this all explain Orpheus, the Prince of the Comet's ability to disrupt the power of the Elder Brain, since seemingly no magic from the new weave is able to interact with that of the old weave? Well, it does not actually explain that. See, things do get a bit more complicated once you start involving the outer planes. Remember that Mystra is powerful, but she is powerful in the Forgotten Realms, in the world of Toril where these stories are set. Her weave of magic only applies here. She can't go and start removing the ability for devils to cast spells in the Nine Hells because she has no influence in the Nine Hells. She has no weave there. Magic simply works differently over there. So in regards to the Yankee and any magics that they might have developed over literal eons of existing in the endless space of the astral plane, or any magical items that they might have acquired in the tens of thousands of worlds that they have raided, it's literally just impossible to determine. Whether this acquired or learned ability of Mother Gith to be able to simply disrupt the psionic influence of the Mind Flayers, and then of course an ability that later was inherited by her son Orpheus. Whether this ability is able to penetrate or interact with Karsus's old weave is simply impossible to tell. We do know that Mystra can use the weave to negate psionics. By the way, this is a power that she can literally grant to her chosen, and we have statistics for it in the lore. But what's interesting is that we also know that Mystra herself, but also her chosen, can interact directly with raw magic. So basically, it is possible that psionics could bypass the weave, and that the weave cannot be used to disrupt or interact with psionics, but that raw magic can actually do that, which is why Mystra and her chosen can do it. Now, this is possible, and it is good to keep in mind at least, but I think that the biggest unknown here, what makes this part of the deep dive a lot more difficult to get to the bottom of, actually has to do with the Elder Brain itself. And what I mean by that is that, well, the Elder Brain literally wanted to break free from the control that the three chosen had over it, and it knew that the only way that it could do that was through the prism, by utilizing the power that Orpheus had. In other words, even if the Elder Brain had the ability to counter Orpheus's power, it is difficult to tell whether it would have done it, because it wanted that power to influence it. So as to the question of why Karsus's great power was seemingly unable to counteract Orpheus's psionic interference, I honestly do not know. It is possible that Orpheus's psionic ability is more supernatural, or that it taps into an entirely even different kind of magic unknown to us. It is possible that the Elder Brain could counter it, but chose not to. It is also possible that normally the power that the Crown of Karsus gave the Elder Brain would have allowed it to counter it, but with the Nether Shards having been taken out of the crown, which, let me remind you, it is the Nether Shards that had the power to give the wearer dominion over itself, clearly as that is what they're using to dominate it, that without the shards embedded into the crown itself, the wearer cannot gain dominion over itself, which makes sense, and hence it would be vulnerable to interference from other powers that might seek to counter or issue control over it and its vassals, and as such, vulnerable to Orpheus. But yeah, I am really, again, I'm speculating here. I have no true answer. But before I end the video, there is one thing that I have completely sidestepped for this entire deep dive, and you might have noticed it. I haven't mentioned the Scepter of Karsus at all, the third and final item that comprises the Regalia of Karsus. Well, I don't think, actually, that the scepter itself is in the game, first of all. So, outside of the small lore given to us by the book here, the Annals of Karsus, there is not much to go on, unfortunately. However, I will say that there is a particularly famous scepter from the times of the Netherese Empire in the lore. One, in fact, that shares a lot of similarities with the crown and the orb, both in themes, in scale, and in power. I am, of course, talking about the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings. Now, this scepter is one of only 2 legendary artifacts that we know that the Netherese specifically build using instructions from the Nether Scrolls. See, the Nether Scrolls, for those of you who don't know, are basically they're like the most important magical artifact in the entirety of this world, in the Forgotten Realms. So all magic in this world is based on the information found on these scrolls. The scrolls were created by the creator races, the first beings that existed on this planet, and that is believed to have basically the cheat codes of magic. Like, the scrolls basically straight up just tell you how exactly to do everything that you want magic related with no limits. The Netherese Empire were able to do all of the crazy, impossible things that they were able to do literally just because they found a few of these scrolls. Like, they are that crazy. Anyways, the other legendary artifact that we know factually that they build using the Nether Scrolls, again, scrolls designed to help you break the mold of how magic works, was the Crown of Horns. Now, there is some debate on whether or not the Crown of Horns was made by Merkel, an old god of the dead, or by the Netherese, perhaps by both, but the important thing here is that the crown literally has the ability to hold a god inside of it, like a phylactery. If you remember from my video on Merkel, this is actually how Merkel survived the time of troubles. So this is the power that we're talking about here. Great power to control or manipulate or handle gods. And so the other legendary item made by the Netherese using these nether scrolls was the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings. But this scepter technically was not crafted by Karsus. It was in fact crafted by an arcanist named Glarios Larum. However, just as the arcanist and his pupils were about to complete the scepter, deities and their servants attacked them to prevent its completion, and Glarios was killed. Now, why would the gods meddle so hard and send their minions to prevent the completion of the scepter when I spend almost half of this video talking about why gods don't like to do that? Well, see, this is one of the most powerful scepters in the world. It's probably even stronger, actually, than the crown or the orb as I have described them. So any magical attack or psionic ability that is used targeting the user of this scepter will always rebound with 100% accuracy and then target the caster. So any spell that you cast on the wearer will be reflected to the caster, but the effect of the rebound will be amplified tenfold. So if you target me with a disintegrate spell, it will instead revert back to you and then deal 10 times the damage. And that's just one of its abilities. It can also automatically cast either heal or harm when you touch a creature with the scepter, up to 9 times a day, and then once a day you can touch a magical effect or a magical item in order to automatically remove the magic from that target. When you remove magic in this way, there is 1 in 3 chance that the removal of the magic is permanent, as in the magic item becomes mundane permanently, and if you target a location, that location becomes an area of dead magic forever. Now, if you remember, based on my explanations of how the weave and magic works in this world, you can very easily determine that what this staff is actually able to do is it's able to disrupt or unweave the weave of magic. It can remove the weave from an item or a location. But none of that matters. Literally nothing that I just said, none of those abilities, as crazy as they are, none of them are the reason why this scepter is strong. You might as well delete those abilities from the scepter and it wouldn't change a thing. The real reason, okay, that the gods wanted to destroy the scepter, and the reason that it was created in the first place, was because every single time that the scepter is used, one random god that has influence in the world is literally banished from the world. And that god is then unable to interact, see, commune, travel to, or have any kind of influence whatsoever with the world for 10 whole days. You use the staff, and one god is deleted from the world for 10 days. Oh, and when that happens, all of the clerics that get their spells from that god lose their spells for those 10 days. It's actually crazy when a magical item is so strong that it literally feels like a homebrew item, like a joke item that some YouTuber made for a PDF. That is not like an actual thing that exists in the canon of the universe, but oh, it does. This is a real item. An item that is part of the history of the Forgotten Realms. I find the idea of an item that banishes gods to be fascinating, but maybe more so like, how can a magical item even do that? Like, what is it that the magic of the item is doing that is causing this to happen? And after thinking about it, I am even more fascinated at the concept of a magical item that uses belief, like the faith of clerics, as the fuel for its magics, as if absorbing all the faith that a god receives to power the magical item, in turn leaving the god with no faith for 10 days. Not that we know that that's how it works, but the idea of that sounds fascinating to me. Anyhow, the reason I bring this up as the strongest possibility for the Scepter of Karsus is that, well, first of all, this is the most powerful and most famous scepter from the time of Netheril. Then 2, it is peculiar that both items use the term scepter for the name, rather than, I don't know, something like wand or staff. It is just an interesting coincidence. You don't really see the name scepter being used that often. And then 3, the scepter deals with gods and ways to destroy or control them, and it holds themes of magic absorption and magic negation, all of which are, of course, as you know, concepts that the other items in the Regalia of Karsus hold. I mean, after all, this was the specialty of Karsus. But also 4, even though the scepter was technically not crafted by Karsus, the lore does state something freaking fascinating. Quote, "Finally, as Glarius began the final stages, the divine minions broke through his defenses and destroyed him. The unfinished scepter was then snatched up by another of the Netherese sorcerer kings, who used it to escape the fray." End quote. Huh. The staff was not picked up by the gods, nor by one of the servants of the Arcanist, and it was not picked up by one of the many pupils or wizards that were present during the creation. It says here very explicitly that it was picked up by a sorcerer king. That is a very interesting note to make. The lore continues on by just stating that the scepter would go on to exchange hands many times throughout the ages, but that's about it. That's literally just all we have. There's no more lore about the scepter. So of course, what I am alluding to here, if you cannot tell, is that what my theory is that it was actually Karsus who ended up picking up the scepter of the Sorcerer Kings, and that he then either sought to claim responsibility for its creation, or that he would go on to complete the creation, because it states that the scepter was not completed when the gods attacked. So I believe that the scepter of Karsus is the scepter of the Sorcerer Kings, stolen by Karsus and then finished by Karsus to go on to become one of the trifecta of items that would go on to become the regalia of Karsus. But of course, that is just a theory, a D&D theory. Thank you all so much for watching, and thank you, Battlemarked, for sponsoring the video. Do remember to check out Battlemarked over on Steam. It's been a fantastic time playing it. The link for it is in the description. Make sure that you use that link so that they know that I sent you, please. And also, as always, I am releasing a companion PDF for this video over on my Patreon at patreon.com/MrRex. For this video, I focused the PDF on the Netherese so that you could have an easy to read and easy to understand packet regarding who the Netherese were, what are the Mythalars, how they function. I have mechanics in there for actually like using the Mythalars and what abilities they would have. I have information on the Ferrum, as well as several stat blocks for the Ferrum, one for a juvenile Ferrum, one for an adult, and one for a powerful elder Ferrum. I have also brought over 12 canonical spells from Ancient Netherese, spells that we got from 2nd edition that I converted here to 5th edition, so they're very canon, very lore friendly. I also included 2 10th level spells. I also added specific rules for what it would take for a creature to be able to cast such spells. It's pretty neat stuff. I make companion PDFs for every single video, so if you want to get them all, do make sure to subscribe over on my Patreon. It's a lot of value at this point because you're getting a lot of packets. I've also recently made a new full digital product called The Faces of Evil, a compendium of evil-themed subclasses for each of the 5th edition classes, which you can find on my website at mrrex.store. I have put an ungodly amount of effort on it, and I am hella proud, so definitely check it out if you haven't already. The link is also in the description. I made the Faces of Evil in collaboration with Paul from Pact of the Dice, who you should definitely check out here on YouTube. He makes lore videos just like I do, but he makes them for Eberron, so if you like what I do, you will definitely, most definitely love him. Especially if you play on Eberron. The link to his channel is also in the description below. I swear to God, just watch one of his videos. You will love it. But yeah, tons of links in the description that you should check out, and you definitely should check out all of them. If you do, I will keep making 50+ minute long videos like this one, okay? So I promise. Anyhow, that's it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.